my dad set me up with the crown prince, a notorious invalid. He was so frail he couldn't even swat a fly. After we got married, I took it upon myself to look after him, dressing him and spoon-feeding him medicine, constantly worried he might just kick the bucket. But then one day, I saw with my own eyes this supposedly delicate husband of mine effortlessly take down an assassin with a single sword thrust. Our eyes met, his face streaked with blood. "Aurora," he said, "what did you see?" Terrified, I stumbled back, clutching my head and scurrying away. I didn't see anything," I stammered. "When I was 16, my dad arranged a marriage for me. He said this man was kind, gentle, and humble, the perfect match for me." With curious eyes, I asked, "Which family's young master is it?" My dad just smiled. "The royal family. There aren't many suitable young men in the royal family, and no princess." "Dad, why don't you just say the crown prince's name?" I asked, and then my eyes rolled back, and I fainted on the spot. It was the crown prince, the one who had been sickly since birth, prophesied by the state preceptor not to live past 20. What was it like to be a crown princess? Thanks for asking. I was basically on standby to become a widow. My reluctance lasted only a day because the palace sent people over the very next day. They came and went, bringing gifts. First, there were 10 large chests of plain, unadorned gold and silver from His Majesty. The Empress's jewelry followed, and then the so-called royal betrothal gifts. I stared at the rare treasures, wide-eyed like a country bumpkin. After the palace people left, my dad pointed at the piles of stuff in the courtyard. "Except for what His Majesty bestowed, the rest is all yours," he said. My brother stood by, arms crossed, and raised an eyebrow. "Still want to be the crown princess now?" he teased. I clenched my fist. "Crown princess, I'm destined for it." Did they think being a crown princess was easy? Like in stories, where you just become superior and enjoy endless wealth and glory? How naive I was. I was constantly startled. On our wedding night, the crown prince collapsed after 1 cup of wedding wine. I nearly died of fright, thinking the wine was poisoned. On the second day of our marriage, on our way to pay respects to His Majesty and the Empress, the crown prince had an attack. He clutched his chest, his face pale, and my hands and feet went cold. I immediately ordered a palace servant to fetch the imperial physician. On our return visit day, I sent a messenger to my dad, saying the prince was too frail to visit. My dad drew a crying face on his reply and added, "Your dad understands. My daughter, you must be so tired. Your dad is heartbroken." I reread the letter 3 times but couldn't discern any genuine heartbreak. When the crown prince had an attack, the poor old imperial physician was practically carried to the Eastern Palace by 2 palace servants. He arrived panting, his face red, looking no better than the prince himself. Then came the examination, prescriptions, and a long list of dietary restrictions. Half an hour later, I stared at a cabinet full of medicine and couldn't help but shiver. No wonder the prince had a faint herbal scent about him. He had to drink so much medicine every day. What was the difference between that and living in a medicine pot? I glanced at the prince's bedchambers and maturely shook my head. I fell in love. Although the crown prince was frail, he was incredibly handsome. He was born when His Majesty unified the 2 kingdoms of Qi and Zhao. At that time, His Majesty, looking at the vast territories, named this long-awaited child Yinzhao, hoping the prince would become a decisive emperor who expanded the empire. However, the crown prince grew into a sickly beauty, taking 3 breaths with every step, his bones seemingly fragile. Because of his illness, his emotions couldn't fluctuate too much, so his expression was always serene. At first glance, he seemed cold and noble, but he couldn't even hold a bowl steady. I couldn't bear to watch, so I took the medicine bowl and helped him drink it. First lesson of surviving in the Eastern Palace: some things, once started, never stop. Like taking care of the crown prince. At first, it was just helping him drink medicine. Later, it gradually included dressing him and serving him food. Eventually, I took over almost all of his daily care. I was surprised that I, who had never waited on anyone before, quickly mastered the art of caring for the crown prince. Even more surprising was how naturally the crown prince accepted being waited on hand and foot. So, I held multiple positions in the vast Eastern Palace but only received 1 salary. "Your Highness, my dear Highness, how do you sleep at night?" I wondered. I pitied the crown prince's weak health and genuinely wanted to take good care of him. Besides, I'd received so much gold and jewelry from him. It felt wrong not to do anything, but my willingness was one thing. The crown prince's complete lack of refusal was another. I felt a little unbalanced and tried to find some equilibrium by, say, messing with him when he was doing important work. His Highness was busy. Although the current emperor was still relatively young, his early campaigns left him with many ailments, making him lack energy. About 2 years ago, the crown prince started overseeing governmental affairs. As His Highness was reviewing memorials, I quietly moved the inkstone further away. A moment later, I gleefully watched his hand, reaching for the ink, miss its target. I stood to the side, covering my mouth to stifle a laugh. The crown prince glanced at me and slowly moved his hand a bit further, reconnecting with the inkstone. Later, when he wanted to turn a page, I deliberately hid the book behind me. He reached out with his left hand to grab it, and while I dodged to the other side, he used his right hand to snatch the book away. His Highness was indeed good-natured. He never seemed to get angry when I teased him. He would only give me a disapproving look, never even scolding me. I started getting bolder. When he was writing, I'd deliberately lean my head close to him. I'd stare at him with innocent eyes and ask, "Your Highness, what's this? Your Highness, whose memorial is this? Your Highness, what does this mean? Your Highness, you." Finally, His Highness couldn't take it anymore. He gently pressed the cool base of his palm against my forehead, pushing me away. His thin lips barely moved as he said, a little quieter, "No problem. Aurora can be quiet," I declared. I gazed at His Highness's perfect profile, then pulled out a piece of paper and wrote a few big words. "Your Highness is busy. Please pay attention to me." I handed him the note. He tilted his head, frowned, and tapped his distinctively jointed fingers on the table. His Highness spoke plainly. "Aurora, where did you learn to write? It's quite underdeveloped." Underdeveloped is underdeveloped, but why quite? I thought. Is it really that bad? He gently pinched my cheek. "Aurora, don't you like spending time with me the most? Let's start practicing calligraphy tonight." My second lesson of surviving in the Eastern Palace: never easily expose your weaknesses. Be cautious, and even more cautious. As Crown Princess, even if I didn't want to get involved in court affairs, I would occasionally stumble upon things I shouldn't see, like today. In fact, I was supposed to be delivering medicine to His Highness, but I ran into the Prime Minister. Speaking of the Prime Minister, he was practically a household name. He was born into a wealthy merchant family in the south. In his teens, he followed his uncle to the capital to do business but unexpectedly scored first in the imperial examination. He entered officialdom. He had courage and talent. Within a few years, he had established himself in the capital. Now, the Prime Minister was a dominant figure in court, so powerful that even His Majesty was wary of him. However, when I met him, he wasn't quite like the rumors. He resembled a friendly old man who always sat in a pavilion drinking tea on the street, always smiling. Opposite this old man sat His Highness, coughing twice. When I reached the door, the two had just finished their conversation. I didn't know what they talked about, but the old Prime Minister's face was grim as he left. I held the medicine bowl. "No, you're leaving already? Stay a bit longer." After drinking his medicine, His Highness brought up the Prime Minister. "He usually has no dealings with me. He visited you today. Aurora, what do you make of it?" What did I make of it? Of course, I made nothing of it. Why ask a girl like me about men's topics? Why ask someone who loves romance about politics? Of course, I couldn't actually say that. After some thought, I carefully observed His Highness's expression and said, "This is definitely a weasel paying respects to a chicken." His Highness sighed, covering his face with his hand. "Aurora," he said sincerely, "read more books." As he spoke, he stood up and casually brushed off his sleeve, seemingly preparing to go out. A large patch of light from the doorway shone into the room, falling onto the empty space at his feet. He stood in the sunlight, as if encased in a soft golden glow. His eyes were bright, his brows distant. I inexplicably smiled at him. "Your Highness, I don't really like reading, but I like hearing you call me Aurora, you know?" He walked out, casually replying, "I also like calling you Aurora." In fact, this wasn't the first time the Prime Minister and His Highness had met privately, but their several meetings always ended unhappily. Primarily, the Prime Minister wanted to marry his daughter into the Eastern Palace. As you know, besides my mother, there was also a noble consort in the palace. The noble consort's surname was Yang, and she was the Prime Minister's sister. My mother was gentle. If not for my father's favor, she would hardly survive in the palace. The noble consort was strong. If my father were to pass, the palace would likely fall into her hands. What does that have to do with the Prime Minister wanting to marry his daughter to you? I asked. His Highness smiled. I've made it so clear. And you still don't understand? I scratched my face. How is it clear? His Highness sighed. That's why I'm so frail and was prophesied by the state preceptor not to live past 20. If Miss Yang also married into the Eastern Palace, then this kingdom might be renamed Yang in the future. He tilted his head and looked at me, his tone drawn out. And a foolish girl like you would be devoured by Miss Yang, bones and all. I thought that after we married, he would give up, but now it seems he won't let it go. He said, "Oh, I get it," I exclaimed. You married me because you didn't want to marry Yang Shirshi? Yang Shirshi is the Prime Minister's daughter. His Highness frowned. I married you because I wanted to marry you. It has nothing to do with not wanting to marry her. Although it was convenient, I was going to marry you anyway. And of course, you don't need to do anything. It's enough for you to be happy here. How can that be? I protested. The empire is about to change hands. How can I just sit by and watch? Treacherous officials seizing power have always been reviled, especially when both His Majesty and His Highness are such good people. It's better for the empire to remain under the Zhao family's name. I looked worried. Even though we're married, the Prime Minister is so smart. Maybe he'll find another way to marry Yang Shirshi to you? His Highness seemed unwilling to continue the topic. He took large strides, leaving me behind, and a single sentence drifted back as his robes fluttered. No, Aurora, he won't think of another way. I usually sleep soundly at night. Most mornings, I'd wake up either tangled awkwardly in my blanket or uncomfortably held in His Highness's arms, as he'd had enough. But this night, I vaguely felt His Highness get up. He tucked me in and quietly got out of bed. I opened my eyes, still disoriented, and only saw a blurry figure gradually walking away. I rubbed my eyes, put on my outer robe, and followed him. At some point, several palace lanterns lit up nearby. I crouched behind a huge bush and cautiously peeked out. In the brightly lit courtyard, several guards were holding down two assassins dressed in black. His Highness walked over and looked down at them. He held out his hand, and a guard respectfully presented a sword. Placing it in his hand, the sword gleamed with a chilling light, making His Highness's aura cold and ruthless. The assassins weren't afraid of the sword in his hand. They even provoked him. I won't tell you anything, one said. Before he finished speaking, his head rolled, blood splattered. I plopped onto the ground, nearly screaming. His Highness's voice was like a ghost, sending shivers down my spine. I didn't want to hear anything from you anyway, he said. The remaining assassin also didn't get to say a word before His Highness ran him through with his sword. Although the courtyard was lit, perhaps it was just my timidity, but I felt chills running down my spine. It was terrifying. I held my breath and looked at His Highness again, only to see him covered in blood, head tilted, looking at me. When our eyes met, he paused for a moment, then his voice softened and gentle. Aurora, he said, walking closer. What did you see? I scrambled up and ran back to the bedchambers. Help, help, Mom, Dad, your daughter's life is over. Third lesson of surviving in the Eastern Palace. Never be curious about things you shouldn't be curious about. I huddled in bed, trembling with fear, covered in sweat, but daring not to relax my guard. I strained my ears, listening to the sounds in the room. Soon, steady footsteps echoed on the floor, coming closer to the bed. I closed my eyes, thinking, sure enough, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I shouldn't have hastily married him for those golden jewels. Look, the supposedly frail crown prince has turned into a venomous demon. In an instant, I even planned my epitaph. Here lies a peerless beauty who forever sleeps because of her greed. Anyway, since I was dead, who would know if I was truly a peerless beauty? I might as well claim the title first. The blanket was suddenly pulled back. His Highness had changed his clothes and stood by the bed, gentle as jade. He leaned down and pinched my cheek. Why are you running? My eyes quickly welled up with tears, and I pleaded softly, I don't want to die. His Highness helped me up and pulled me into his arms. Saying nothing, I was even more scared. I won't say anything, and my memory is bad. I'll forget everything after a night's sleep, okay? His Highness smoothed my hair and said softly, look how much you're trembling, and you're even burrowing into my arms. Actually, you're not that scared of me, are you? It's okay now. He still carried a faint scent of blood. He cupped my face and kissed me, his words a mix of temptation and negotiation. Aurora, don't be afraid of me, okay? In fact, I was terrified. When he told me not to be afraid, I just nodded blankly. In the end, I probably fell asleep again after he held and comforted me. The next day, I woke up with the sun already high. His Highness was still in the room. Seeing me stir, he called my name. Perhaps it was because it was daytime, less prone to breeding evil than night, and the palace servants were bustling about cheerfully, or perhaps because he had been comforting me all night and had no intention of ending my life. In any case, I felt less afraid. He sat on the edge of the bed and touched my face. "Are you all right?" he asked. I hugged the blanket, cautiously observing his expression. You said last night that they were assassins sent by the Prime Minister," I said. "If you hadn't killed them, you and I would have died." "Was the Prime Minister angry because you provoked him when he visited yesterday?" His Highness looked helpless. "Aurora, what are you saying? How did I provoke her? She's just easily angered. Whatever I say, she gets angry." The counselor said others were easily angered, but his own face clearly showed a hint of unruliness. His Highness was still the same His Highness. I boldly asked His Highness why he pretended to be frail. "Aurora," His Highness said, "I'm not pretending to be frail. I am truly weak. But you're so good with a sword. You know martial arts, right? If you've practiced martial arts, how can you be frail?" His Highness patiently answered, "I'm not skilled in martial arts. I only learned some basic things to save my life. Practicing martial arts is not easy. It requires long-term practice. My body is inherently weak, so the harder I practice, the more I damage my health. When my body is damaged, it's difficult to achieve great success in martial arts. It's a vicious cycle." I was half understanding. "In short, I still really need you, Aurora," he concluded. I immediately felt a sense of mission. I patted my chest. "No problem." After the two assassins came and went without a trace, the Prime Minister fell ill. According to His Highness, the Prime Minister hadn't attended court for the past 2 days and had shut himself off from visitors. Even the 2 stone lions outside the Prime Minister's mansion looked worried. His Highness said, "I've troubled him so much that he won't bother you recently, right?" I observed his expression. His brows were relaxed, so he seemed to be in a good mood. I immediately seized the opportunity to ask, "Your Highness, I heard there's a new storyteller at the Clay Tea House, and he's very good. I want to go see him." His Highness first glanced at me. I leaned back, smiling obediently at him. "You can go," he said. His Highness gestured towards the door. "Take a few people with you, then I'll be at ease." Actually, I was already the Crown Princess, so I was supposed to abide by palace rules and not leave the palace freely. But His Highness didn't seem to care about these rules. Every time I said I wanted to go out, he would nod and say he'd cover for me, telling me to just go and have fun. This time was no different. He asked how long I'd be gone, just like before. I excitedly put down my pen, ready to pick out a dress. "I'll be back in an hour." His Highness looked at the characters I had practiced, frowned slightly, and seemed about to say something but didn't. In the end, he only said, "Good." The storyteller at the Clay Tea House looked familiar. I stared at his dark face for a long time before realizing, hey, isn't that Chu Sansi? Speaking of him, I have to talk about the legendary stories of this man. His life was practically a script for a play. Chu Sansi was once an aide to the Prime Minister. This man was extremely intelligent and skilled at understanding people's minds. He was a refugee who miraculously survived the southern floods. After fleeing to the capital, he became an aide to the Prime Minister. It was during those years that the Prime Minister steadily rose through the ranks. What was most talked about was the 3,000 li in a year incident. Later, he continued to rise, becoming the Prime Minister, second only to the Emperor. The Prime Minister's promotion path was later described as the first time I heard of an official promotion traveling 800 li overnight. But unfortunately, Chu Sansi fell in love with one of the Prime Minister's sisters, Yang Shi, the twin sister of the current noble consort Yang in the palace. Yang Shi also liked Chu Sansi at the time. However, the Prime Minister would never allow his sister to marry such a commoner. The two had a falling out, and Chu Sansi was driven out of the mansion, but he was very defiant. He bribed servants and the housekeeper, sneaking into the Prime Minister's mansion under the cover of night to secretly meet Yang Shi. After 3 attempts, he was finally discovered by the Prime Minister. It was said that although Yang Shi was noble consort Yang's twin, Yang Shi was superior in both appearance and literary talent. Initially, The Prime Minister had intended for Yang Shi to enter the palace. Who knew she would fall in love with Chu Sansi? Later, Chu Sansi was chased by the Prime Minister's mansion, and to save him, Yang Shi was accidentally killed by her own brother, the Prime Minister. After that, the Prime Minister quieted down, and Chu Sansi also disappeared. These were all just rumors. No one knew the truth, but with Yang Shi's death, the Prime Minister, against all dissenting opinions, married his other sister into the imperial palace. Chu Sansi's story ended in the eyes of the world, and the once renowned Prime Minister's aide, Chu Sansi, whom even the Prime Minister treated with respect, now transformed into a spitting, ranting storyteller in a teahouse, telling tales of chivalry and romance. I thought it would be great if His Highness could recruit this man. He knew a lot about the Prime Minister, so perhaps he could help His Highness overthrow him. But on the other hand, since he had such a good relationship with the Prime Minister, he probably wouldn't be willing to help His Highness. I shook my head, gathered my skirt, and prepared to leave. These brain-racking things were better left to His Highness. As I reached the door, I bumped into a group of people entering. Aurora, what a small world. Yang Shirshi glanced at me. I actually recognized her as Yang Shirshi, but I deliberately turned my head and loudly asked the little palace maid beside me, "Who is this?" The little palace maid was very cooperative, responding to Your Highness. "This is Miss Yang, the Prime Minister's daughter," she replied. Yang Shirshi looked me up and down with very rude eyes. "My father said the Crown Prince married the General's daughter, so he gave up on me," she said. I didn't believe it, but seeing you today, I was excited. Indeed, seeing is believing, Yang Shirshi snorted. As expected, I can't trust what I hear. You really curse like a sailor. You're such a good-for-nothing, she continued. You don't know music, chess, calligraphy, or painting, nor are you skilled in archery or riding. You're just a silly girl who jumps around all day. How did you get to marry His Highness? Good question, I thought. I've been wondering that for a long time myself. Maybe His Highness just likes good-for-nothings. After all, everyone has their own taste. But could I actually say that? Absolutely not. One has to pretend to be sincere when necessary. I said, my dad is the general who pacifies the nation, and my brother was last year's martial arts champion. Why do you think I got to marry him? Then, holding my arms, I began to fabricate wildly. Besides, you have no idea how much His Highness loves me. He loves me to death. Even if I wanted the stars from the sky, he'd pluck them for me. Oh, how would His Highness live without me? So, I continued, you shouldn't even think about marrying into the Eastern Palace. His Highness won't even look at you. Isn't that right? She was trembling with rage, pointing her index finger at my forehead, shaking. At the same time, a low voice came from behind me. Yes. I spun around abruptly. My frail, helpless Crown Prince husband stood a few steps behind me, smiling at me. He had clearly heard everything I said. My face burned with embarrassment. I wished I could instantly shrivel up like a cooked shrimp. I forced myself to remain calm and said, see? Even His Highness says so. His Highness extended a hand to me. After I ran over and took his hand, he nodded to Yang Shirshi. Aurora and I have something to attend to. We'll be leaving now. After we had walked quite a distance, I looked back and saw Yang Shirshi still stomping her foot in anger. How did Your Highness get here? I asked. His Highness looked straight ahead. An hour had passed. When you didn't return, I came out to look. Oh, I said. Were you worried about me? We walked down another path, along a street called Rainbow Stream, towards the palace. There weren't many people around. His Highness always held my hand when we walked. Even with a crowd of guards and palace maids behind us, he didn't seem to mind. Halfway there, His Highness suddenly said, if you had a friend. He paused, an unlikable start. Then his expression returned to normal. If you had a friend who lied to you, but it was to protect you, then you would forgive him, right? He then quickly added, as if trying to salvage the situation, after all, it was to protect you, so it's excusable, right? My hand was trembling and damp with sweat. Your Highness, why are you so nervous? I laughed. I don't have such a friend, but I might have such a husband. Are you that husband? His Highness's eyelashes fluttered. He didn't speak. I tilted my head, smiling, waiting for his answer, but then he suddenly turned his head, made a fist, and brought it to his lips, coughing lightly. Say what you just said again, he muttered. What an unexpected answer. I touched his flushed, feverish cheek with the back of my hand. I tentatively repeated, husband? Are you saying you want me to call you that? Husband, is there something you want to lie to me about? Husband, speak up. Husband, my husband gritted his teeth and covered my mouth. All right, that's enough. I still wouldn't quit. Whispering, husband, finally, my frail, helpless husband, in a fit of pique, sped up, leaving me behind. In the evening, His Highness was still angry, staring at the brewed medicine with a sour face that screamed, I'm angry, I'm crying, I won't drink it. I had no choice but to coax him. Your Highness, I've thought carefully about what you said today. I began. You said you lied to me to protect me, but why lie? Does protecting me imply you assume I'll always be a hindrance? He mumbled an unclear then added, no, it's just that I'm afraid you'll get hurt. I said, perhaps I'd rather be hurt than deceived. He fell silent. A long time passed, so long that the wind outside quieted. Then he said, actually, Aurora is very smart. I asked, so, you had something you wanted to lie to me about? I did, he admitted, but not anymore. I stroked his head. Good boy, drink your medicine quickly. I told His Highness about Chu Sansi. Your Highness can go find him. I suggested, wouldn't it be great if he could serve the court? His Highness looked thoughtful. I thought he had already left the capital. He said, I didn't expect him to be telling stories at a tea house. You're right, perhaps it's worth a try. I don't know how His Highness tried, but he went out with his head held high and came back with his head bowed. Did he refuse? I asked softly. His Highness shook his head. Perhaps the tea house is his favorite place, more than the court, he said. At least there are no conspiracies, no suspicions, and he can receive applause after telling his stories. I patted his shoulder, comforting him. It's okay, Your Highness, don't be sad. He has no foresight. His Highness blinked. I'm not sad for him, he said, but Your Highness is clearly unhappy. I pressed. His Highness said, oh, the sun is too strong. It's making my head spin. All right, I get it, my delicate crown prince, I thought. By the end of June, the weather was indeed getting hotter, but it also meant the rainy season was coming. In previous years, although there was rain in the north at this time, it wasn't much, but this year, for some reason, there were always thunderstorms and heavy rain. Due to the heavy rain, even court sessions were cancelled for several days. His Highness's health was poor, and it was especially noticeable during the rainy season. He leaned on the bed, looking at the rain outside, and sighed. I sat on the edge of the bed and sighed with him. When I sighed, His Highness chuckled. I sigh because I'm worried about the rain affecting the common people's crops. He said, why are you sighing? I openly replied, I'm sighing because you're uncomfortable. I pressed his forehead. Try it yourself. There's already a mark here. I stared at him, worried, and finally asked the question that had been buried in my heart for a long time. Your Highness, is the prophecy the state preceptor made true? His Highness didn't hesitate. Fake. That quickly? His Highness said. It was a rumor I had spread myself. How could it be true? Even if the state preceptor had really made a prophecy, I wouldn't just wait for death. I would at least fight back, right? I felt relieved. At least I won't be a widow anytime soon, right? I won't let you become a widow. His Highness laughed. You don't have to look so relieved. I promised the general I would always cherish you. I pursed my lips, slipped my hand under the blanket, and held his hand. I want to be with Your Highness for a very long time, I said. His Highness returned the squeeze and softly said, we will. After several days of continuous rain, it finally cleared up. That day, His Highness told me that the Prime Minister had invited him for a boat ride on the lake. Aurora, guess what he wants to do? He asked. Here we go again. What was the difference between this and a teacher testing me on my homework? I lowered my head, pretending to organize the table. Aurora doesn't know, I mumbled. His Highness called my name. Aurora, he said. Then guess what I want to do? I tilted my head. You want to? I made a throat-slitting gesture. Wrong guess. Aurora, His Highness smiled and denied it. I just want to kiss you before I leave. With that, he kissed my cheek and then swiftly walked out. Aurora, see you this afternoon. I rubbed my face, standing there dumbfounded. Okay. Not long after His Highness left, the little palace maid who always attended to me rushed into the room and whispered in my ear, Your Highness, the Prince and Miss Yang from the Prime Minister's mansion are on the same boat, admiring flowers. You should go and see. Did I hear wrong? Didn't His Highness say the Prime Minister? When did it become the Prime Minister's daughter? I asked if the Prime Minister was there. He is. Ah, I thought. Then I understand. They're still trying to get Yang Shirshi and His Highness together. Alright. I changed my clothes and quickly headed to the lake. I definitely wasn't uneasy, or thought something would happen between the prince and her. I was just curious and wanted to see. Pure curiosity. The lotus flowers were in full bloom. I sat in a restaurant by the lake, looking through a second-story window, and saw His Highness's party. The huge, lush lotus leaves obscured them. The further the boat went towards the center of the lake, the less clear it became. But I had seen Yang Shirshi subtly inching closer to His Highness while pouring wine. I scorned her actions, but since the boat was already far away, I could do nothing. I simply pretended to be calm and drank my tea. The little palace maid beside me seemed more anxious than I was, sighing constantly. I gently comforted her. Oh, I know you're worried, but don't rush. Before I finished speaking, I heard shouts from downstairs. A boat has sunk. I shot up, only to see the wooden boat in the middle of the lake overturned, its occupants gone. His Highness couldn't swim at all. My legs went weak, but I didn't dare collapse. I forced myself downstairs and, without thinking, jumped into the lake. The day was hot, and the lake water wasn't cold, but there were too many lotus flowers and leaves, obstructing my vision. I was so anxious I was almost in tears. Just then, a familiar voice came from beside me. Go left. The name Chu Sansi flashed briefly in my mind, but I had no time to think deeply. I instinctively followed his words and swam left. When I found His Highness, his eyes were tightly closed, and he was sinking. His Highness was heavy, and I couldn't pull him. Fortunately, the guards who had followed me also jumped in, and together we pulled His Highness ashore. His Highness was unconscious. I didn't linger and took him back to the palace. News of His Highness falling into the water and the imperial physician being called quickly spread, alarming His Majesty and the Empress, who rushed over. Coincidentally, His Highness woke up for a moment just as they arrived, but soon fell asleep again. He was already in poor health and had been in the water, so he quickly developed a fever. I touched his face. It was burning hot, but he was murmuring. I used a cool cloth to wipe his hands and feet, then brought more blankets to cover him. Eventually, his fever broke, but he remained asleep. During this time, I heard that after the boat sank that day, Yang Shirshi was eventually rescued, but the Prime Minister drowned. With the Prime Minister's death, his factions either fled or dispersed, and his era came to an end. This was good news. However, I couldn't understand why Chu Sansi was also in the lake and, reportedly, also died in the water. Perhaps His Highness could give me an answer, but he remained asleep. Since marrying into the Eastern Palace, I had never seen him unconscious for so many days, but the imperial physician always said he would wake up when he had slept enough. This was truly a case of listening to a gentleman's words for a moment, and losing 10 years of study. I worriedly complained in a low voice by the bed. Your Highness, if you don't wake up soon, I'm going to drop dead. This was true. I hadn't slept much these past few days to take care of him. A finger hooked my pinky, and His Highness's voice reached my ear. Nonsense. Extra Story 1, Chu Sansi's life. He only ever loved one person. Her name was Yang Shi, the Prime Minister's sister, and a renowned talent in the capital. He, however, was just a refugee who had fled from the south. That winter, he sought shelter in a dilapidated temple, wearing only a tattered single garment. He thought he would freeze to death that night, but after a brief, hazy nap, he felt much warmer. Opening his eyes, he saw a small pile of firewood in front of him, slowly emitting a warm glow. A girl was poking the firewood, making the fire burn brighter. Around her sat servants and maids. Seeing him awake, the girl was delighted. Do you feel warmer? She asked. Chu Sansi clenched his fists, finding his hands and feet already warm, so he nodded and thanked her. Although the girl was beautiful and dressed richly, she didn't speak haughtily. Instead, she was like a girl next door. She said, I just came back from this solitary temple. It was snowing outside, so I came into shelter. I saw you sleeping in a single garment and thought you must be cold, so I put my winter coat from the carriage over you. He was disheveled and penniless, clearly out of place among these people, but because of the girl's warmth towards him, even her servants treated him courteously, not at all like a beggar or someone to be looked down upon. He took the dried food the girl offered and drank their water, regaining his strength. Daybreak came, and the snow stopped. The girl left with her group. Before leaving, she gave him the winter coat and a pouch of silver. We had a pleasant conversation last night, she said. Since you are a scholar, Take this silver to get by for now and pursue a career. It will make your life in the capital easier in the future. Chu Sansi asked the girl her address and name. The girl only smiled. We will meet again if it's fate. Chu Sansi did not pursue a career. He used the money to find the Prime Minister. At that time, the Prime Minister was not yet the Prime Minister, but an official. After several conversations, he became his aide. In the mansion, he saw the girl again. Her name was Yang Shi, the Prime Minister's own sister. Chu Sansi had washed his face and changed into new clothes, looking quite presentable, but even when facing the girl he admired, Yang Shi didn't recognize him. She didn't recognize him during their next few meetings either. He didn't tell her until the official was promoted to Prime Minister. Only then did he tell Yang Shi that he was the little beggar from the ruined temple that day. Actually, he hadn't intended to tell her. After all, while that encounter was beautiful, his image in it was quite a blemish. But the Prime Minister wanted to marry Yang Shi into the palace, which made him desperate. Yang Shi finally remembered when he told her. Oh, she said, you're that person from the ruined temple. My brother often praises your extensive knowledge and brilliance. Yang Shi walked around him twice, nodding constantly. Not bad, not bad. You're actually quite handsome. Chu Sansi blushed and stammered. You really think I'm handsome? Yes. Yang Shi nodded emphatically. Later, Chu Sansi often met with Yang Shi. When he went out to handle affairs for the Prime Minister, he would also bring Yang Shi delicious food and interesting things. As time passed, the two fell in love. It was a mutual affection. However, good times don't last. This relationship was soon discovered by the Prime Minister. Even if he couldn't send Yang Shi into the palace, he would never marry his own sister to such an ordinary man without an official position. He was furious and drove Chu Sansi out of the mansion. Chu Sansi was young and arrogant. He felt the Prime Minister looked down on him, so he bribed the servants and housekeeper of the Prime Minister's mansion to sneak in every night and meet Yang Shi. However, this method soon became ineffective. He was discovered by the Prime Minister again. This time, the Prime Minister intended to kill him. No matter how capable Chu Sansi was, he couldn't overcome the Prime Minister. So, when he was heavily surrounded and thought he was going to die, he never imagined he would survive. He also never imagined that the price of his survival would be Yang Shi's life. When the Prime Minister's sword was about to stab him in the stomach, Yang Shi suddenly lunged forward and blocked him, taking 2 arrows for him. He and Yang Shi met in winter, and their last meeting was also in winter. The cold wind brought that girl to his side, and then, a few years later, took her away from him. From then on, the sky was vast and the road long, and Chu Sansi was alone again. Years later, Chu Sansi returned to the capital, intending to live a simple life as a storyteller, but the young crown prince sought him out. The young crown prince was at most 20 years old. His tender young face was pale, yet his demeanor was no less imposing than the Prime Minister's. The young crown prince explained his purpose. Chu Sansi refused without hesitation. Actually, he had thought about avenging Yang Shi, but who was the enemy? Was it the Prime Minister, or was it himself, Chu Sansi? He had intended to persuade the young crown prince to leave, but the young crown prince simply sat down, as if intending to have a heart-to-heart talk with him. Chu Sansi had never encountered anyone like him. This young crown prince was truly something. After noon, Chu Sansi was terribly hungry, but the young crown prince still showed no signs of leaving. Chu Sansi, with a headache, finally relented. He wouldn't follow His Highness, but if he needed help, he could just come directly to him. He never expected the young crown prince to be so impolite. He actually came looking for him. On the day of the boat trip with the Prime Minister, the young crown prince had already sent someone to inform Chu Sansi before their meeting. He asked for his help in puncturing the boat and making it capsize. The rest, the young crown prince said, he would handle himself. Chu Sansi didn't care what arrangements the young crown prince had. He had his own ideas. When the boat sailed into the lotus pond, he secretly slipped into the water. Using a dagger he carried, he poked a hole in the boat. As the boat leaked, he used the water's force to tilt one side of the boat higher. The young crown prince probably felt it and deliberately leaned his body to one side. With a splash, the young crown prince voluntarily fell into the water. Chu Sansi thought, this young crown prince's actions are truly baffling. Chu Sansi didn't pay much attention to the chaos. He simply thought that since the young crown prince had made arrangements, he wouldn't put himself in danger. He swam underwater towards the Prime Minister. Once he got close, he tightly embraced his neck and pulled him down into the water. The Prime Minister struggled desperately, but a man accustomed to luxury and poor at swimming was no match for him, who had spent years fleeing and doing hard labor. Actually, his own consciousness was gradually fading, but he wasn't afraid. It didn't matter who killed Yang Shi, as long as he and the Prime Minister both died. Wouldn't that be enough? He wanted to personally take this man, who even killed his own sister, to hell to apologize to Yang Shi. Extra story 2. After His Highness woke up, I caught up on my sleep. After waking, His Highness finally told me what happened that day. So, Chu Sansi had already been persuaded by His Highness. Then why did he also die in the water with the Prime Minister, when he clearly could have swum up? His Highness thought for a moment. Perhaps for him, death was also a way to escape suffering. He said, "I'm not Chu Sansi, so I don't really understand him." His Highness then added, "Originally, I just wanted to teach the Prime Minister a small lesson. I didn't expect Chu Sansi to be so ruthless, even to himself." "So, what do we do next?" I asked. His Highness stroked the top of my head as if petting a kitten. "We don't need to do anything," he said. "You just keep eating what you like, playing what you like, and read more books and practice your calligraphy." "What about your Highness?" I asked. His Highness stroked his chin. "Of course, I'll be supervising you." "That's not fair." I clung to His Highness's clothes. "Not fair, not fair. Why do you just get to supervise? You should do something else too." His Highness's gaze fell on the bed. "All right," he said suggestively, "then let's do something else." I quickly slid off His Highness and scurried away. Extra story 3. The 8-year-old Crown Prince. The Crown Prince had a big secret. The little girl from the general's family, named Aurora, was just too noisy. That little girl, daughter of General Qin, often brought her to the small training grounds in the palace to watch the soldiers drill. But the little girl was only 8, a lively and active age, and couldn't sit still at the training ground. She would drag her personal maid to hide under a huge mimosa tree for a peaceful break. That mimosa tree was right outside the young Crown Prince's window, where he read and practiced calligraphy. But one day, he suddenly heard rustling outside his window, as if some small animal had gotten in. He peeked out and saw the little girl secretly eating osmanthus cakes, huddled against the wall. After that, every few days, that small figure would appear outside his window, eating different snacks each time. The little girl wasn't possessive. She would break off pieces of cake to share with the little birds in the tree or the small pets of some palace noble. The young Crown Prince tolerated it for a few days, but finally couldn't take it anymore. He said in a sinister tone over the little girl's head as she squatted by the wall, "How do you have so much food? You never seem to run out. Every day you come to my window, chirping and eating, talking to yourself. So silly." The little girl wasn't startled. This remark made her drop the cake in her hand. She stared at him with wide eyes for a long time before patting her skirt and saying, "Greetings, Your Highness. I just came here because it's cool under the tree." With that, the little girl pulled out 2 more candied fruits from her small shoulder bag and offered them to him with both hands. "Would Your Highness like some?" The young Crown Prince was silent. "I don't eat them," he said. From that day on, the little girl never came back to eat there. The young Crown Prince felt annoyed, thinking he had spoken too harshly. It was just eating. Although a bit annoying, it didn't disrupt his studies. Had he been too fierce? She was just a little girl. After all, eating a little was fine. Being able to eat was a blessing. He hadn't told her not to eat there. He would tell her next time he saw her. When she was around, he found her noisy, but now that she was gone, he felt bored. The young Crown Prince lost his appetite and spent every day straining his ears, listening for any movement outside his window. But after that, there was truly nothing but the rustling of fallen leaves. Later, the young Crown Prince fell ill and went to a solitary temple outside the city to recuperate. He stayed there for 6 years. When he officially returned to the palace, he was busy with state affairs and dealing with the Prime Minister, so he had no time to meet the little girl. It wasn't until the Prime Minister repeatedly tried to marry his daughter to him that he, unable to refuse any longer, came up with a plan. Why not marry that little girl? As soon as the idea came to him, he went to the general's mansion. Aurora, at 16, had grown into a graceful young woman, yet she was still like her childhood self. She had a small shoulder bag tied to her waist, filled with pastries. Only now, her little bag was covered in dirt, and her hands were muddy. She was planting a wilting peony. The Crown Prince stood in the shadows, watching her for a while. then was ushered into the main hall by the arriving general. The general heard his intentions and laughed heartily. "I thought this girl would never get married," he exclaimed. "She's a grown woman, yet she still wants to go out and play every day and doesn't like to read. Even so, I only have this one daughter," he continued. "I don't have high expectations for her. I just hope she can live a happy and healthy life." The crown prince then stood up and earnestly promised, "General, rest assured, I will certainly cherish her and ensure she remains happy and healthy forever." As he left, the crown prince subconsciously glanced at a certain corner. The peony, now watered, was robustly swaying in the spring breeze. It would surely bloom into beautiful flowers soon.